In this video, we are going to have a look at how we can set up CI/CD pipelines in GitHub and how they can interact with our Databricks workspace. So the outline of this video will be twofold. First, we will look at some admin stuff. So that will involve setting up and creating the CI/CD pipeline. It will be a pipeline that is able to push code from our main branch into a designated place in our Databricks workspace. And that pipeline needs some configuration as well. Then we will assume the role of a user on our Databricks workspace. So that could be a business analyst or data scientist. So we assume that we make some Python code changes that we want to maybe put into a production environment. So the initial development takes place on a feature branch. And once we are happy with those changes, then we will make a pull request from the feature branch into the main branch that takes place in GitHub. Since we have set up the CI/CD pipeline, that will now trigger the CI/CD pipeline. And that will eventually push our code changes from our main branch in GitHub into our Databricks workspace. And from there, in this new folder on the Databricks workspace, we will try to set up a Databricks workflow, and we will talk a bit about why it is smart to have this additional folder with our code in. So before we get started by setting up the CI/CD pipeline, I just want to show you this documentation site. So this actually is along the lines what we are going to set up. It has some more detail about how the process is, and it also gives a couple of different flavors of how to set up this workflow. But overall, this video here is going to give one example of how to set up our Databricks workspace with CI/CD pipelines, and give an example of how the developer experience will be with such a connection. One thing to notice is that at the bottom here of the documentation there is a YAML file. This is basically the CI/CD pipeline that we are going to be using in our repository as well, just with a few changes. So let's have a look at our GitHub repository. As you can see, we have our add notebook and our README file that we created in the previous tutorial. But what has been added is now a GitHub/workflows folder. So let's try to enter that. And let's try to have a look at this YAML file here. So I mentioned that the YAML file here is actually just a copy of what we can find on the official Databricks documentation site. I've made a few changes. I've commented out a couple of lines that we don't need for this part. If we are going to have a look at what this CI pipeline is doing, it basically has some triggers. So if there is a push to the main branch, then it basically starts this workflow. And then it has a couple of jobs here. So it sets up a couple of environmental variables. Those we will set up as GitHub secrets in a moment. And it points towards a specific place in our Databricks workspace. So this path here, subpath here, already exists. And we'll have to make sure that this is a repo folder in our Databricks workspace. So we have to create this one as well. All right. Then we check out the code. So our workflow has access to the code here. We set the Python version. We set up the Databricks CLI. And I think maybe some of these steps here are actually not needed, all of them. So maybe we can comment out some more. But the important step here is actually this command here. This basically uses Databricks CLI, and then it updates the path that we have chosen. So the repo path is basically an environmental variable we have here. So that will reference a folder within our Databricks workspace. And then we choose a branch. And in our case, the branch will be the main branch by default, because that's the only branch that is triggering this workflow. But you could have more advanced use cases where you could have different things happening depending on the branch you are have changes to. Next thing we have to do is we have to go into settings, because we are referencing 2 secrets here, and those we have to insert and give access to the pipeline. So the way we do that is we go into settings, and in settings we can set up, or we can open here secrets and variables under security and click on actions. And here you can add your repository secrets. So if you don't have them created already, you can click new repository secret, and you have the secret name up here, so that could be the deployment target token, and then you add the secret value here. So the deployment target token, how do you find that? Well, you have to go back to the Databricks workspace. So what we do now is we go back to the workspace that we want to set up the CI/CD pipelines with. In our case, let's stick with the development workspace for now. To generate a token, you have to go into settings, then you go into developer, and then you have this access tokens that you can manage. You can see I already created one recently, but you have the option to generate a new token. So you just press generate new token, and it will generate a token for you that you will copy, and you will copy it into our secret here in GitHub. And then you press add secret. All right. So that's the one secret that we will need. The other one that is required is the deployment target URL. The deployment target URL is also something we can find here in the actually in the URL of the workspace. So the deployment URL will simply be this part of the URL. So this number here will probably be different in your case. So just copy this part here into the deployment target URL repository secret. The last thing we have to do is to create a repo folder where our GitHub Actions workflow is pointing. So our workflow looks like this, and it has a repo path that looks like that. So workspace users Nikolai, and then we need to create this folder here as a repo folder. So let's go to our Databricks. So I'm workspace, I'm in the workspaces, users, and in my personal folder here. And then I'm going to create a Git folder. I'm going to give it this name here because this is what is required. And then I'm going to copy the link of our repository. So this is just the same that we did in the other tutorial video as well. Oh, it overwrites the name, so let's just take this name here again and then save that. So we create the Git folder. Yes, so there we have it. So what I actually have now is I have a Git repo that I've just set up, and then I have this other Git repo that we used in the previous tutorial. So the idea here will actually be that we are going to develop some new features within this folder here, and we will going to create it in a feature branch. Then we will go to GitHub, make a pull request that will start the CI/CD pipeline, and then it will push the changes back into this other workspace builder folder on the main branch. So it's back and forth through GitHub, but I'll try to convince you that it's a good thing that we have that option with our CI/CD pipeline. We are basically done with setting up our CI/CD pipeline. We have not tested it yet, but I want to show that in terms of how the experience will be if you're a user of the Databricks workspace, let's say a business analyst or a data scientist that want to develop some new code. So let's take that persona now. So as a user on the Databricks workspace, we have created this this folder here as if in the previous tutorial. Right now we are on the main branch. We will have to change that because we don't want to interfere with things on the main branch, because that's usually code that might be running in production. So the first thing we're going to do is we're basically going to create a feature branch that we as a developer of the code can work on without having to worry about breaking things in production. So I want to add a product function. So let's make a feature branch that is named something like that. All right, we create the branch here, and so now we can see we are now on this feature product function branch. So let's go in here and let's make a change to our add notebook and see if we can add a product function as well. So here we have a product function, and let's see if we can run that function. Let's say something like that. I have a cluster set up, so we can just check if the code works here as well as expected. Yeah, 5 + 2 is 7, 10 × 2 is 20. Sounds about right. Next step is we want to basically push our changes that currently only locally exist in our Databricks workspace in this particular repo folder. So we push that to GitHub now on our feature branch. So we give it a small description, and then we push our code changes. All right, now let's go back to GitHub. So, oh yeah, it already updated. So it has realized that we made some changes on this feature branch. So it asks if we want to compare and maybe make a pull request. That's exactly what we want to do. So I will make a pull request from our feature branch into the main branch. We create the pull request, and let's see if it's possible to make the merge. It is. We can also have a look at like what we have changed here. So we have basically changed this, or added this product function, and made use of it once here. All right. Let's go back here. So when I press the merge pull request, that will basically trigger our CI/CD pipeline. So I press here, and then I confirm the merge, and that will basically start our merge into the main branch, and that will trigger our CI/CD pipeline. So that's basically what we can see up here. We can see there's a new run of the pipeline that has started. It's queued right now, but hopefully it will succeed in a moment. So let's see. All right, it actually succeeded now. We can also click into it and see what it actually did. So yeah, looks like it's been doing what we wanted. So actually here we can see it's running this Databricks CI command. So it basically should have updated the workspace builder repo folder on the main branch, so with the updated code. So let's see if that actually happened. So let's go into our workspace, and then let's have a look into our workspace builder. Let's have a look at the add notebook, and yeah, there we have it. We actually have our product function here as well now. All right, so let's just reflect for a second what we have been doing in this tutorial so far. So basically we set up the CI/CD pipeline, and then we have two folders in our Databricks workspace. In this example here, we just have a development workspace, so it's basically pointing from one part of the development workspace into another part of the development workspace. But you could imagine we had two different workspaces. It could be we had like a development workspace and a production workspace, and that the CI/CD pipeline was not connected to the development workspace, but was only connected to the production workspace. So let's say you're a developer or a data scientist, a business analyst or something. You do your development in the development workspace on a feature branch that is connected to GitHub, which we have up here apparently, and then you can do your push to your feature branch. All right, when you do that, then after that you can do a pull request from the feature branch into the main branch. You could set up policies that would not allow you to do that. but that you would need a reviewer in terms of actually accepting the pull request. So that could be some kind of verification that it actually works. And once that has been accepted and started the CI/CD pipeline, you could have that the CI/CD is actually talking with the production workspace instead of the development workspace. So sending the code to an entirely different workspace, which the business analyst or data scientist might not have write access to, or maybe not even read access to. And here in the production environment, you might want to have some scheduling of your different programs that is running in production. So that separates the development and things that are in production in a very nice way. And that's kind of the argument about doing this, that you can actually use these CI/CD pipelines to move the code to places where development is not supposed to take place. And instead, this is where you have your good version of your code that is running in production. So the last thing we're going to do in this tutorial here, before it becomes too long, is to create what is called a workflow. So we know we kind of have a safe place where our code is not being changed by developers within this folder here, because changes now has to go through this process of making development on a feature branch and then do a pull request in GitHub before it actually enters the main branch and gets pushed towards this folder here. So this is basically where we can have our code that is more stable, or you could say your production code could be here. So one thing you might want to do is you might have programs that you want to run with a specific cadence, and let's say we very keen on calculating these numbers here. So the way you create a workflow is really simple. Just click here, click schedule. You give it a name. Let's call it that. The schedule could be, okay, we only want to run it every second day. And we can create a cluster. We can use serverless, all-purpose clusters, or we can create what is called a job cluster. We'll go create a job cluster here, because they're usually cheaper. I will just disable some of these functions, and we just take a very small cluster here, because this is a very simple program. So yeah, and we can call it add numbers job cluster. All right, let's just confirm that, and let's create that. All right, so this basically created our schedule, and this is basically a workflow. If you are curious about what or how many workflows you have currently scheduled, you can go to the workflows tab here on the left, and here we can see that we currently only have this one we just created. It's not been running yet, so we don't have a lot of info to watch, but this is basically the place where you can go see how the job has been running in the past 60 days. And you can see which task it consists of. So and you can set up different types of settings here, put in some parameters, or what should happen if the workflow fails. Maybe you want to send an email if it fails. So but there's enough content here for probably another video. So let's stop for now. So I hope this video was helpful in understanding how CI/CD pipelines can be used with Databricks workspaces, in particular in terms of how you can split your code between development folders and production folders. So in our example here, we just had two different folders, but in theory you could also have those folders being in different workspaces, and there could be different access policies to those workspaces and folders. And I also hope it gave an introduction to how the workflow could look like for the users that's actually developing the Python code in this example.